I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see.
It looks something like this.
Welcome to the CTO Studio. I am your host, Etienne de Bruin. CTO Studio is where we chat with CTOs building amazing products, building incredible teams. Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Okay, welcome to this week's 7 CTOs podcast. As Afrikaners would say, potgooi.
That does not sound very good.
That does not sound good. Do the Dutch have a translation for podcast?
No. Any words that have emerged out of technology or anything to do with computers, the internet, is just in English.
Just leave it alone.
We stopped making up words a long time ago.
Just leave it alone.
Yeah, slowly it's all turning into English. Yeah.
So when you say link, you will say link.
Link, that's it.
The Afrikaners would say skakel. It's very, very strange. So I'm with Krijn van der Raadt. Krijn, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Close friend of mine, and super happy to have you chit-chat with us today. First and foremost, is it the Netherlands or Holland?
Well, the country is the Netherlands, and part of the country, there's 2 provinces, North and South Holland. I'm from North Holland, so for me, I can say I'm from Holland and from the Netherlands, but they're 2 different things.
Oh, and the South is called?
Well,
They're
the
both
southern,
called Holland.
Yeah, so there's North Holland and South Holland. They're 2 provinces, kind of like, here you have like North and South Dakota.
Okay, so technically then the Dutch shouldn't get pissed if you ask them if they're from Holland.
Well, if they're not from that part, then yeah, there's a whole bunch of other provinces and they don't like it. But most people live in the western part, which is North and South Holland.
Okay, where the tulips are.
Yes, that is where the tulips are, and windmills.
I'm trying to hit every stereotype I possibly can. So just like my name, you're carrying quite the cross in the United States.
Yeah.
Krijn. Mm-hmm. That's only a little worse than GIJS.
Yeah. Yes. That is the worst, for sure. Gijs. Yeah.
Gijs is easy for me to say because the isn't a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, no, my name doesn't help. It's not very common in Holland either. And here, I like to joke whenever I go to the doctor's office, like the nurse will open the door and then try to like pronounce your name, right? So I'm long pause. That's it. They look at the sheet of paper, and I just like for 3 seconds they're like, I'm going to butcher this is going on in their mind, and then I just stand up. I'm like, yeah, that's me. Don't even try. Okay.
What do you get typically?
Well, people will say Krijgen. I hear that when they try, or that's usually it.
Krijgen, holy moly's, that is nasty.
Yep.
I was telling you and people that when people are really struggling with my name, that I go with the ATM thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll say like crime, but with an N.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You got to help them.
Yeah.
You got to help them.
Or Brian with
and then
a K.
what do you? Brian
with a K, but then it turns into Krijn, which is a little,
Then it becomes that AHA song, which is Crying in the Rain.
Yep.
And then tell me your last name isn't helping either.
No, Van der Raadt or Van der Raadt, 3 parts. Very common in Holland. Everybody has Van or De or both. Here, it's not very common, and I don't have a middle name, so it's super confusing. Yeah.
Also, the problem I have with Etienne de Bruin is it's very important that the D is lowercase.
Yeah.
And SaaS apps out there, for some reason, think that the first letter of your last name is always uppercase.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't look right to me. It's actually an insult to my eye.
Yeah, it's grammatically incorrect. And then a lot of web forms will automatically then try to help me correct my name, and then put pieces in like middle name and it used to be that systems would not allow spaces in last names, and I had a credit card where I could choose to either squish it all together or hyphenate it. So I squished because
that was going to be my last point on this topic, which was the spacing between the words in your last name.
Yeah.
How many times have people tried to search for your records and then you have to say it's either with or without spaces depending on what your system allows?
Yeah, it happens a lot. What was the most frustrating was that in Southwest, the site that allowed you to book flights and their rewards site had different rules. So one automatically squished it together, the other did not. So I would never get my rewards points because it matched it up by last name. And it took a very, very long time to get that fixed. So,
biggest problem
the struggle.
The biggest problem I have is when I go to rent my rental car company, they will give me my car at the center. I will get in the vehicle and then I will drive to the boom and they will not release the vehicle because they can't find me. So they think and I'm like, yo, it's the same company.
Yep.
It sucks.
Yeah.
And Eric Casas, I mean, you're like, what are we even talking about? 2 words, single. Krijn, so you were born and raised in the Netherlands.
Yep.
And tell us how you got from that beautiful country to this beautiful country.
Well, many years ago, in 2002, I was backpacking through Europe, and my now wife Sarah was as well, and we met at a hostel in Budapest. We hit it off. We met up a couple of times. She went back home to San Diego, and this was, of course, over the summer. We kept in touch, and then during the holidays later that year, I came to visit. And
did you come to visit her?
Yeah, of course.
Nice.
Yeah. So I came to visit her, and then met her family and her friends. She grew up here, and it was just obviously it's beautiful here, and then. Everybody was so welcoming, and we kind of went back and forth for a year, which was really long distance. It wasn't really dating. It was like, meeting up for occasional vacation.
And were you in the tech space? Were you or coding?
Yeah.
Were you?
Yeah, I at that point I was getting my master's in computer science, and I worked for a year in between, getting my undergrad, and I was working through my master's as well. So I was a developer, and then. A year later, I had to do like a year-long internship to write a paper and do a bunch of stuff. So I picked UCSD as my target to find a professor and reached out. And there was a guy here named Henri Casanova, great guy. Henri. Henri.
Oh,
yeah,
like
he was
French.
from Corsica, so almost French.
Okay.
Yeah.
Henri,
Yeah. So I reached out to him and said, hey, how would you like a year of free labor? And he was like, that sounds great. But you have to come here, and I need to meet you because he's had some weirdos join his lab, so I did. And
what made him? What work was he doing that made you want to work with him?
So I was really into distributed systems and parallel programming, and at the time, like grid computing was like the big thing. Like everybody thought that was gonna take off, and in a way it has, but just gotta squint a little bit. So he was working on scheduling algorithms for easily divisible workloads on grid systems, and the difference between let's say what we call now the cloud and a grid is that a grid is made up of all these nodes that have different bandwidth. They may be a different processor platform altogether. So if you're going to break up, work, you can't just do MapReduce and assume that everybody is going to handle it the same way, right? You have to think about how do I break up the workload to send it to all these different nodes that could be all across the world, and how long it's going to take them to process it and then get the results back in the most efficient manner. So
cloud sort of obfuscating resources, don't think about the hardware. Grid is more very specifically targeting certain types of jobs for certain type of hardware.
You could do that. In this case, what we did is we accepted the fact that they were all going to have different link speeds from wherever you schedule the job from to wherever the processing is going to happen, and then the processing is going to be at very different speeds. So the scheduling algorithm that he had created, kind of academically, would send like small little pieces of work to test how fast can I get the workload there, how long does it take, and then use that information to schedule the rest. And basically, if you can imagine like a Gantt chart with like send and process and send back in it across all these different nodes, how do I optimize it so that A to Z is as short as possible? So I built a prototype for that, wrote a few papers that were accepted by some grid computing conference, and at least I know I read it, and then I assume that whoever accepted the paper read it, and that's probably it.
Hey, that's good enough, man.
That's how I got here, and then we got married and never left.
Is grid computing, has it been replaced by cloud computing, or is that a whole different topic?
I haven't really kept up with it.
Because I remember it kind of was a thing, and then it wasn't a thing.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of excitement about it. Like everybody was going to use their farm of PCs that was doing nothing at night, and all that excess processing power is going to be used by companies or organizations to do meaningful things. So, look, in a way, it's still there. So SETI at home was one of the early examples where people would basically volunteer their PC to look for aliens, right? So that's essentially, that was a massive grid, and it was a very successful one, and maybe still is, I don't know. So there's some less wholesome ones, like right now there's all the Bitcoin, mining malware that gets spread. So in a way, that's grid computing, right? So I guess that's still there.
I wonder if this SETI at home will find maybe a vehicle traveling through space.
You would hope so. Otherwise, they're not doing it. Well, it's not alien, and it's pretty small, and I think it stopped broadcasting. So
it did stop, didn't it? It's goodbye to spaceman.
Yeah.
So then you just kind of quickly, when we met, you were in a top executive position at Great Call. So maybe just give us maybe very quick intro on how you sort of developed your career from obviously hands-on coding to then leading teams to then entering sort of the C-suite at a massive company.
Yeah. My first job actually in Holland, we were building, this was a small dev shop building like e-commerce sites. I joined there as a team lead after finishing my undergrad program. So I'd had experience leading teams before, development teams. But when I joined Great Call, and there were a few jobs in between. When I joined Great Call, I was one of the few developers on the team. There were like 30, 35 employees or something. We were pretty small. 6 months later, the person who was leading the team left, and I stepped into his shoes, and the company just kept growing and growing. So I started as director in charge of development, and then later on that team grew, and then I took on IT, project management. And data analytics and reporting, and just in the end, I ended up being the CIO, essentially having all the engineers reporting to me, and a lot happened in between.
I think some of that was when I met you. Great Call was on sort of a rampage, acquiring companies.
We made a few acquisitions.
You would be with us one week, and then the next week you would be in some exotic location, integrating a brand new team or something.
Yeah, we did. We had a few acquisitions. It was three, and like one or two that didn't happen. That's a kind of fun and interesting adventure. Is acquiring other companies, especially if it comes with with talent. The teams. Yeah. So we did that. we tried to develop most of our own technology, and somewhere in the middle of my 10 years at Greycall, I set up a product innovation team, which was really fun. Really, we'd been lucky and had made very good kind of like gut-driven decisions in the past in terms of new products, and some of us wanted to get a little more kind of methodical about it to reduce the chance of failure. As a company grows, you can't really have too many false starts because it's very disruptive. So we did that, and then we started looking at acquisitions. We did one that was essentially we bought the technology and the product and everything but the people, because the people had already left. And those are, everybody who's done acquisitions are like, okay, if you just buy technology, chances are, it's not going to work out too well. And from a technology perspective, we ended up, trying to do something with that product, but in the end, that didn't work. And then the last acquisition we did was, that was a larger company. They had about 35, 40 employees. And that technology team and most of the other employees were successfully integrated.
Do you have a set way in which you integrate teams like that? Or is there something that you've learned from the process that maybe you wish you would have known at the beginning of the process, or do you just have to roll the dice and hope that the right personalities are integrating, or is there a right way or a wrong way to do it?
Well, I think we did pretty well, and I think the reason we did well is that we were really mindful of essentially the chance of those people just saying like, okay, I don't like this big company, because at that time we were like 1,200 employees at Greycall, so to a startup that had been around for quite a while, but to them it felt like corporate America, right? To us it slowly started feeling like it, but so we wanted to make sure that they wanted to stick around. So what we didn't do was go through an org chart and just say those people belong in this team and just split it up right away. We took it really easy, made sure that the leaders in the team leaders in the company that we acquired stuck around, and we also try to just make it as easy as possible for people to get used to us, right? So if you have 1,200 employees, you become a little more formal, and their HR will have forms, and you can't just go buy your own laptop. That goes through an IT department, things like that. And if you're not used to that, that will feel like red tape and bureaucracy. So we basically just made it as easy on them as possible.
So being mindful of where they come from, which feels pretty obvious. Mm-hmm. And then
it's really easy in theory. In practice, it's really hard because you have to start convincing people like, okay, I know, like my IT department, I basically told them, look, right now, just I know these other things are really high in priority, but just drop them for a little bit and help them, become part of this new family, because if we don't succeed, there's going to be a much bigger mess to clean up later, right? So doing it in practice is actually really hard.
I hear you. I think you're dealing with people that sort of are at a heightened emotional state, because the people being acquired have to sort of relinquish any sort of ideas that they had about their future. And then, not to mention, if it maybe is a startup versus corporate, we used to be able to buy the laptops we liked, and now we have to have a requisition process.
Yeah.
So, managing and integrating that must have been a PITA. Yeah.
No, it's hard, and people get a little scary, right? Or they get a little scared about what what is this place going to be like? Am I going to be treated like a number? Am I still going to have a job? So when people feel a little insecure about the future, and they're in unfamiliar territory, you want to make sure that they don't just immediately start applying for other jobs and leave, right? Because if you buy a company and everybody who works there leaves, it is so hard to make something good out of it. It's just we've gone through that, and
I'm assuming
it's
your
really difficult.
CEO. I'm assuming your CEO expected you to just make it happen in a way, like just. So if there is a mass exodus, I'm assuming you would be sort of to blame in a way.
Yeah, I don't know if he would have gone that far, but I did. When we, once we made the decision to acquire them, and it was clear, that we wanted everybody to stay. I made him the promise that if anybody was going to leave, it wasn't going to be, on account of me or my team. That we were going to do everything in our power to help them stick around, and that was going to be my key measure of success for this acquisition. Are they going to stick around? And they did.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think retaining top talent is sort of a scary field in a way, because how do you convey to someone that I really need you without making them feel like they can have you, by the cojones?
Yeah. Well, there's a few ways you can do that. So one is if you're going to have to work with people on a daily basis, then you don't really want to be negotiating with them ever, right? So I think showing interest in what they've built, right? And there's this, if a larger company buys a smaller company, the smaller company is likely going to feel like there's this larger company may feel like they do things better just because they're larger and they've had more financial success, right? So you want to be mindful of that and never ever have that, have it appear like that. So be complimentary about what they've accomplished, and be welcoming, and make sure that they, they can tell you what they need and what they want to be successful, and then give them that, and then the negotiating, leave that over to like your CFO or something, right? Because that way you can just you can be the good cop, the partner, the confidant.
I want to touch very briefly on your actual product at Great Call, which is sort of your flagship product, which is the Jitterbug phone.
Yeah.
Kind of a crazy story how you guys negotiated sort of network contracts, and how you're sort of in this very sort of competitive David versus Goliath space of providing coverage. Without getting into that too much, can you tell us a little bit? There was a decision that you made about the Jitterbug phone software, the OS.
Yeah.
I don't know. Can you walk us through a little bit? So what OS you were on, and then what you decided to move to? Yeah. And some of the hits and misses with that?
Yeah. Building a completely custom cell phone, even in the late, 2000, before 2010, became, kind of harder and harder. And in the last, 5 to 8 years, it's become really, really difficult. So what we
because of the proliferation of smartphones.
There's so many smartphones out there. Everything is pretty much a smartphone.
Like who needs another smartphone?
Yeah, well, there's and the Jitterbug Flip is what what we call it these days. I mean, it's a flip phone, and a lot of people still use it. But try to find one that's not like a $10 track phone these days, right? It's kind of hard.
And just for clarification, the design decisions you've made as a company was targeting seniors.
That's right.
So that seniors could have access to the wealth of the mobile internet without being completely overwhelmed by what today's smartphone gives them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the origin of the company was with Arlene Harris and Marty Cooper. They're They're royalty in the wireless industry. Marty Cooper is actually the inventor of the cell phone. He in 1976 or 8 or something, he famously, I think this is a true story, called his main competitor, who was at a competing lab. He called him from his giant, like these giant phones, right, with the big things with the antenna, and he called him his friend and competitor at his desk phone to let him know that he just beat him. So great guy. So Arlene and Marty created the first Jitterbug phone with Samsung. So they convinced Samsung to build them a custom phone, mainly because of their great relationship with them. But by the time I joined, we started working on the third generation because we wanted to have flexibility to update the quote unquote apps or just the user behavior on the phone. And at the time we decided to go to Brew, which was a Qualcomm platform. Basically, this is pre-smartphones, and you could get apps usually through a carrier store. So Verizon would sell you like an app that there was a lot of games and things like that. But it gave us the ability to update these devices over the air, which is kind of important, right? I mean, if you imagine buying an iPhone and never being able to update the software on it, it's not going to work very well, right? So we built that, and then at some point, Brew became outdated because nobody was using it anymore, and Qualcomm gave us the heads up, we're going to shut it down. So we had to pick a different platform. So we looked around and. We wanted to do an Android phone at first, but at this time, Google was signing, any OEM that was launching Android phones, Google was getting into agreements with them that stipulated some requirements, like the Google search box has to be on the home screen, and that like certain user experience. Requirements, and understand why they did that. That's not going to work on a flip phone. There are a few Android flip phones, and I tried some of them, and the user experience is terrible because of that.
The flip phone was essential. Obviously, it sounds like the flip phone was a non-negotiable for you for the senior experience.
Yeah, it was still the biggest seller, although the smartphone was catching up, and I think somewhere in the next few years it's going to surpass it. When I left, that was still the biggest seller.
Amazing.
People still want that.
Sort of an example of knowing your customer and picking something that is right for them, even though the whole world is moving to views it as an archaic decision. Right? Yeah.
No, everybody thought we were crazy for continuing to develop it. I mean, we're now at the 6th generation, senior focused flip phone. And I think it was, as soon as smartphones came around, people were telling us, "Oh, you guys are going to be out of business," and boy, were they wrong. There's something to say. At some point, you're the only flip phone around, right? That's a good position to be. Yeah, but we held fast, and that paid off. In the end, we ended up picking the operating system for the Jitterbug Flip was Firefox OS. So for a little while, that was they were Mozilla was trying to push that as kind of like the challenger platform for less expensive devices, and it suited us perfectly. And then Firefox quit. With that OS, Alcatel, who was manufacturing the phone, bought the rights and took over the development team, and they and it made two, like it changed names twice, and at any rate, they were supporting it still. But that's the hard thing about picking a niche platform is that there's even if it seems like there's a lot of promise in it, it may not come to fruition, and you kind of place your bet.
So you're right. I mean, and the current platform that you're on is what? What OS? Are you still on Firefox OS?
Well, yeah, it's called H5 OS, I think.
Okay, so you kind of had to ride that wave.
But it's Alcatel proprietary.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's the same thing. It's basically HTML5 and JavaScript. You run a web server on your phone, and it's all.
And ultimately, you really you only really had two choices, right? Android or Firefox.
Yeah,
OS.
and Android was really not an option. Yeah. So
I want to quickly go away from that to Great Call and sort of your process as CIO with the acquisition of Great Call.
Yeah.
I know I personally went through an acquisition at a much smaller scale, but this whole technical due diligence thing.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to just speak on that a little bit. Mostly, I want to get to advice for future for people who are going to go through that in the future. But just maybe give us a short intro into how that happened, and some lessons learned along the way of the technical due diligence process.
Yeah, So we went through due diligence a few times. We tried to sell the company probably about 3 years ago or so, and that didn't happen. And then we started trying again a little while later, and then eventually, like middle of last year, we succeeded and we had our exit, and that was a great accomplishment. Everybody was really happy. So we went through due diligence a number of times in those 3 years, and the first time really sucked. I didn't know what to expect. I'm the kind of person who likes to prepare for things, and so I asked for advice. And
from who?
So in our case, we were big enough that we had investment bankers involved, and they're like think of them as like realtors for companies, right? So they help you figure out, how to market the company, and they help you present the financials in a way that makes sense to people. So there's lots of help there. And then, there's usually lawyers involved, and they'll have lots of advice on, what are potential, red flags that you should address beforehand. But on the technical side, I was kind of on my own. And the advice I got was, all right, well, so I asked our CEO, and he said, look, whoever's going to look at your stuff, you know it better. And I know you guys have been, getting rid of technical debt, and, your stuff's in good shape. Don't worry. Just don't get defensive, and good luck. So that was really good advice. It's really hard, again, not to get defensive when somebody asks you questions. You're like, oh yeah, that is not great. And so I didn't really prepare, and somebody comes in, and in this case, this was the first time was like a CTO of a much larger company, and this person was smart and had done this a bunch of times, and I was basically just scrambling to answer questions, and I didn't like the way that felt very much. And in the end, it didn't really go through, and it wasn't because due diligence failed. It was going to be an acquisition and integration, and they couldn't make it work on their end. But I told myself, okay, I'm going to prepare. Now, luckily, he helped us find, some security issues and some other things. So we used that as a roadmap to start fixing the actual issues. But I also decided, well, I'm going to prepare myself and my team to go through the process itself better next time, because it's usually like a few weeks of due diligence, or the technical due diligence. It's pretty intense. I mean, when we finally did get acquired, it was by a private equity firm, and they had 3 or 4 outside legal teams looking at different aspects of the business, and then they had consultants who were doing the technical due diligence, right? But privacy, intellectual property protection, security, a lot of the questions came from lawyers, multiple lawyers, asking the same thing. And we had a spreadsheet with like 6 or 7 tabs of questions. So
isn't that great though? Because then they don't understand the answers.
But they have to. So hiding issues or being confusing does not help.
Does not help. Okay, so for the record, BSing your way through it isn't going to help.
It's a terrible idea. For one, they will see through it and will flag you personally as a risk. And even if they don't, right? Let's say you successfully hide the skeletons and they brush a few things under the rug. These are the new owners, right? And then if they find out that you didn't disclose this stuff when they specifically asked for it later on, and you're still around, how do you think that works out? Not very good. So that's not the right. So the best thing to do is I think is prepare, is mentally prepare, is prepare, documentation. But what I ended up doing the third time around is I actually had like a whole storyline about how we did things, about our technology, why we did things a certain way.
You pick a narrative.
Yeah, and I created a deck, like a PowerPoint deck that kind of walked through all of that. And most of it got cut by the investment bankers and put in like a technical and product addendum. It was very nice of them. But what happened when the consultants came in to go through due diligence, I said, hey, I prepared a little presentation. Do you mind if we start with that? And then the rest of the day we just walked through, and I was just sharing with them all the awesome things that we did and why and how we used to do it before. And when they asked questions about, do you have like documents to back it up, or where can we find this? A lot of it we had already put in a data room, and that was kind of mapped to that storyline. So it was really easy for them to get a picture of how we did things and our technology, and it felt so much better. And I think that confidence really helped.
That's interesting, because I think I know with our company there was a good 6-7 month period where we had to get PCI compliant, and in a way that brought to the surface a lot of the documents that ended up becoming assets during our due diligence. So I want to wrap up. I mean, you're so passionate about this that you are now actually helping companies who are doing technical due diligence, either in the process or even preparing for it, even if it's like 5 years down the line. Things they can do today to kind of prepare themselves for it. So I'll definitely put that in the show notes. Just tell me if there's 2 or 3 things that you could maybe advise CTOs today that will make the actual due diligence process a joy, not only for them, but for the acquirer. Are there 2 or 3 things that you can just give them some advice on today?
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing is to do prepare. Don't... if people are saying you'll be fine, just show up, don't do that. Do prepare, just mentally, right? So you don't have to go hire people to do an assessment, although it might be a good idea. Just sitting down and just find a friend who another CTO or somebody who can talk shop, and just have them ask you questions and you answer them. Just practice that, right? And don't try not to get into an argument about why you're right. That's not don't defensive, but don't over-explain why you made a certain decision when clearly they're not sort of happy with the decision you made. Yeah, it's a rabbit hole that we find ourselves in, often. And during due diligence, you don't want to get into that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and then also not blaming your CEO.
Oh, well, that's one very important thing. They're not just there to look at technology. They're looking at the team. You very much so, your team as well, because there's. Today's age, you can't just buy technology without the people to support it, right? It's really interwoven. So they're going to want to know whether or not you're having problems retaining talent, whether you have information silos in your team, whether you have a team structure that will scale or not, if they're planning to grow the business, or if they're going to integrate you, they'll be very interested in your people as well. But what I see is that in a lot of cases, the people who are doing technical due diligence realize that they're talking to somebody who's privy to a lot of information, and maybe they know that certain people in other parts of the organization don't get along very well. And out of everybody, they're most likely to volunteer juicy tidbits, right? So when I do due diligence, I prepare and I look for potential personnel issues, and I'm going to ask the tech leaders, because they're we're not we're oftentimes very honest about our opinion about other people, and you might find yourself sharing things that you wish you didn't. So be mindful of that as well. And then I think the third thing is, even if your code reads like a book and you have great architectural diagrams, if you have the chance, if you're thinking about an exit a year or two away, now is the time to just start documenting some things, because it shows that you're prepared and you're ahead of what your maturity level of your organization may imply, and that can only work out well for you. So doing it all in the last month before diligence, that's not the way to go.
It's really showcasing a healthy process as opposed to just designing glorious documents. It's really showcasing to the acquirer, we have a process that is always documenting, as opposed to thinking you need to put this final product in front of them,
right?
And go make it up in the last couple of days before the due date.
Yeah. So if you think about the outcome for you as a CTO after an acquisition, usually there are two. The two main paths are either you get integrated into a larger organization or you get bought by, somebody who's trying to grow the business, let's say a PE firm, right? So in the first case, they're going to want to integrate you into the organization, right? So you want to look like the type of person who is not going to be a problem, right? So think about your own next career step. And then in the case of, a purely financial acquisition, so like with a PE firm, they're going to want that business to be run well for some number of years while they double or triple the value of the company. So I can guarantee you, if you seem like the right kind of person to get it that far, but not any farther, they know plenty of people that they've worked with before who were great at company X or Y, who can just step in and help you out or replace you. So is that if those don't seem like good outcomes, then think ahead and be kind of strategic about how you go through that. It's probably one of the most important periods in the lifetime of your tenure at a company.
It reminds me, just on the documentation piece, a friend of 7 CTOs, Dan Martell, the way he encourages his people to keep documenting is to always have docs be live. Because often when you think about documentation, it's this thing that gets filed in a cabinet and has a version number, and if you want to change the version, it's this massive authorization process. But he encourages people just to keep the docs open, and anytime you execute the doc, to see it as a live document that can be updated by the person executing the doc.
Yeah.
And I find that to be super helpful. And the second thing is, as we wrap up, it reminds me of the book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which I think is a really awesome way for us to look at what worked for you before you were preparing for acquisition isn't going to necessarily work for you, in the new company that you're moving towards. That is very true, yeah. Any books, blogs, podcasts that you can recommend people sort of keep an eye on, or that you like to keep an eye on?
Yeah, there's a few books that I've read that I think could be helpful for people. I think one of the important ones that I've read was Switch, How to Drive Change When Change is Hard, I believe. It's very simple. A lot of these, it's a leadership book. A lot of them you can really just if you know one sentence, the book. This one is, look, if you want to drive change in an organization or anywhere, you have to win over people's minds and their hearts, and actually start with the heart. And I think it's specifically useful for technology leaders, because we tend to think that if we can just present a solid argument and back it up with data, then surely people will be convinced.
Programming the people,
right? And guess what? People don't listen. They don't listen until they feel like they can trust you. They feel bought into whatever it is that you're trying to sell, right? So you got to start with that. And I used to make that mistake, and I try not to. I still occasionally do, but I see a lot of people like us fall for that. So hearts first, then minds, and why first, then how. Yeah, that's a good one.
Start with why.
Yeah.
Solid, Krijn. Well, thank you. I mean, it's been 3 hours, right? Thank you very much. We'll add contact details for you in the show notes. Krijn is happy to help companies out there prepare for their due diligence, and all-round amazing guys. So thank you, Krijn.
Thank you.
Cheers. Have you chatted with a CTO lately?